Welcome, hello, and hi, my creative friends. Today, we're getting down and dirty with some paint in pen format. From one of the most popular pencil ranges in the world comes a product from a range known for its cool look, black trimmings, and very vibrant colors. Today, I give to you the Faber Castell Black Edition Shaken Paint acrylic markers. Whew, that is one giant name for what looks to be basically a very fancy acrylic paint pen. We've done lots of pencils, a bit of paint and some markers, so I'm really excited to see what these paint pens can do today and how they actually handle. Everyone knows Faber Castell, and if you haven't had a chance to play with their Black Edition range before, they're a series of very black, very triangular pencils targeted squarely at a trendy high school student vibe. They are a very cool looking product that really performs quite well for the price point. We've reviewed the pencils here if you want to check them out. But Black Edition paint pens, I'm not exactly sure what to expect. These paint pens, or the pens inside these boxes here, are relatively new, being released a few months ago in 2024. I'm saying a few months ago because I'm not actually 100% sure when they arrived. They just sort of appeared on shelves without a huge amount of fanfare, and to be honest, are strangely still a little hard to find here in Australia, which is weird for a Faber Castell product. I've used other brands' paint pens before, so I have a little bit of an idea of what to expect with these. But you know what? A lot of our pencil tests and even alcohol marker tests won't actually cross over here for us because this is basically acrylic paint in a pen. So we're just going to have to add a couple of new tests in here. And as always, try to answer that burning question, are they actually any good? First up, let's check out the design of the Black Edition paint pens. This little box right here is the Faber Castell Black Edition paint markers. And so is this box, and also, surprisingly, this box. 3 boxes, 3 types of markers, but all the Black Edition shaken paint marker sets. If we jump over to the Faber Castell website, the Black Edition page is, as always, very vibrant, with the markers top billing. As of December 2024, the entire range of the paint markers Faber Castell has available are classic, metallic, and neon. So everything we have here. Although it does look like you can buy the black and white separately or together, but they're also included in these kits as well. The first of our kits is the 6 marker classic kit, which looks like it contains our primary colors and a black and a white, of course. The second is a 6 marker metallic kit with, you guessed it, metallic colors. And the third is a neon set with all our favorite neon fluoro colors. The packaging on all of these kits is very similar. It's a black cardboard box with a window in the front so we can see the colors inside. And that's a bit surprising because I think you've probably noticed what I immediately did. The colors on the front of this are quite muted, particularly the classic and metallic box. The Black Edition's whole shtick is its vibrant poppy colors, and here, at least on the front, the colors just don't pop. Even that Faber Castell red looks muted. Anyway, let's grab one of these boxes and take a closer look. We have the window, which we can see our markers, and a lot of branding on the front in English and French. I just noticed it also has the tip sizes here as well. That's a great little informative addition. If we flip it, the side also has a marker and the tip sizes. It's funny looking at how thin this box is. I think that white one on the front is slightly larger than the actual markers. The back has a whole mess of information on it with what looks like every language ever. Not quite the classy look the Black Edition pencil packs have, but informative, I guess. There's also a swatch on the top, although this has purple in it, but according to the front, it's a blue. Bit of a printing oversight there. If we open one of these up, these cardboard slips are always very delicate. Oh, look at that! Cheeky Faber Castell. There are actually cardboard spaces on the sides to make these packs bigger than they need to be. If I'm careful, these things are jammed in tight. And here are the markers. Let's take a closer look at them. So this is the Black Edition paint marker. It's a little bit grippy in my hand and it is a bit slimmer than what I was expecting. It's very obviously not triangular like the pencil range, which is honestly a bit of a shame. As I roll this round pen around, I can feel the ball bearing inside rolling back and forth, so definitely acrylic paint. If we look at the caps on either end, they have a small picture of what the nib is, which of course is 1mm for the fine tip and 3mm for the broad. There is a lot going on with the barrel of these markers. If I lay it down with those lids off, we have a pristine white tip and a big black sticker with, again, a lot of information on it. First thing, there is a thicker line in the marker's color because this side is the 3mm side, followed by the Faber Castell logo and info in English and French, and the paint color being Neon Flaming Tangerine. Such a great name. There is also a thinner line and another pristine white thinner tip. If we roll this barrel around, we have a clear side where we can see the paint bubbling back and forth and the nibs again mentioned. If we roll it around again, we have in tiny writing how to use the pen. Instructions are always helpful. Both sides of the marker's nibs are spring-loaded. Basically, you push them down to pump the paint from the chamber up. While there's no indication as to the paint reservoir size, looking at the physical size and mapping it out looks to be about 10 mil. The overall length of the marker is 160mm from tip to tail, and the diameter of the barrel is, for a paint marker, a relatively slim 14.9mm. It's amazing how much information and just like stuff Faber-Castell has managed to squeeze into this, what is really quite a small marker. That's really the first thing I'm noticing with these pens. There's just really no space on them as it's choco-blocko, full of everything under the sun. They also feel a little thin. I guess it's because they are aimed at children, but when you see that initial picture on the front of the box, you'd assume they're about 20% bigger. Speaking of the box front, I was very surprised when these packs arrived at my door as to how lacking in vibrance the branding for them has. I bought these online, and because they are so muted, I thought I must have gotten fakes. But after visiting my local stationery store, I discovered, nope, this is just them. Everything about the Black Edition markers are just a bit more muted than the Black Edition pencil range, which is a bit of a shame. Hopefully there is one thing about these paint pens that do live up to the reputation the Black Edition has, and that's the vibrancy of the paint. So the only thing I guess we can do here is, of course, swatch our markers. I'm quite excited to do this swatching because this is the first time I've gotten to have a play with these markers properly. Other than seeing what sort of colors each of these kits has, I'm interested to see just how saturated and vibrant they're going to be. This test is going to be a little bit different than our normal saturation test, as being acrylic paint, they are either going to be off or on. I'll do a layering test later to see how they go, but first up, let's just simply swatch all of our colors to see how they look. This swatch here is one that I've made up for this test. I've broken it down by kit, and because we're working with paint today, I've put it on a bit thicker 300 GSM acrylic paper. This should give us the best results from these pens. To keep it all the same, I'll be using the 3mm tip for this test. Now, I'm making sure these markers are all really shaken up, which you really need to do with any thicker medium like paint. Our first marker is from our neon kit. It's the Neon Slime Green. No one can ever fault Faber-Castell for having boring names. If you're counting there, that's 13 pumps to get the paint flowing. It's definitely very neon. This color's a little bit transparent, and as I'm moving it along, a little bit scratchy. We can actually see that there's little scratches that the marker's made in the paper. I don't know if that's the paper I've chosen or the marker, but it's a bit ugly and inconvenient. I wonder if going over the top and making that more opaque will help. Our second color, the Neon Yellow Spark now. This seems quite similar to the green here. It's pretty transparent and it's got a similar scratchy feel to it. I'm assuming that's because the paint is thicker. It needs a fibrous tip to make it flow. It's a pretty poppy yellow though. Swatch 3. I love the name of this next one, Neon Flaming Tangerine. It's a very apt name. I really like the color too. It's a darker reddish type of neon pink. However, you are getting the same issues as before, a fairly light coverage, and that tip takes getting used to. All right, the last of our neons, Neon Pop Pink. That's definitely a much more neon pink, or what I call a hot pink anyway. They all feel fairly similar and aren't super opaque, which is quite interesting. Maybe it's a neon thing. We'll see what happens with our other colors. Okay, let's have a little look at those prime colors, which Faber-Castell is calling the classic colors, starting with White Moon. I've added a bit of black card on top of my swatch here, so hopefully we can see how white it's going to be. Feels very much like the neons, very similar scratchy going down, and I think this is actually a bit thinner than the neons. To make it usable, it would definitely need another coat. Our Our sunshine yellow is next. Everyone loves a sunshine yellow. And this is much more opaque. This color is really thick and is easily going across the whole swatch. It's also not as scratchy, I guess because there is more paint flowing and we can't see any obvious scratches on the paper here. Our next color is Code Red. While the color is really nice, it's kind of like a soft red shifting more into a pink. It's not exactly what I'd call a really red, but I think this is an even more solid color than the yellow here. Time for our forest green. It's another really lovely color, but more of a turquoise green rather than what we'd consider a genuine green. It is probably the thickest of our paint so far. Now our sapphire blue. I'm pleased to see this is actually blue and not purple like the swatch on the box. It's also quite a nice blue, similarly opaque like the green here. And finally, for our primary colors, Midnight Black. And it really is very black, very ink-like, and probably our densest color coming down. Onto our third kit, let's look at the metallics. I love a good metallic. Hopefully these have a nice shine to them. First up is our metallic silky silver. This seems to be much thinner than our other pens. Thinner as in runny, not transparent. I guess we learned that secret with our Gold is Gold video. Lots of thin layers give that shine we need. Metallic Green Fizz is next, another great color name. This one doesn't feel quite as thin as the silver, and to be fair, it doesn't feel quite as metallic as the silver did. It also seems a little bit more transparent and a bit browny green here. This metallic blue buzz is nice. It's a very pretty color. Again, not super metallic. There's a little bit there, but not as much as you'd hope. But the color makes up for it here. And the pink, which is metallic rockstar rose, is almost a purple hue rather than pink. But I like it. The colors all seem to be lacking in the same metallic zing that the silver has though. Next up is the metallic bronze glow, which feels fairly thin as it's going down, but looks a bit flat. It just kind of looks like a brown. This one also seems more scratchy on our paper than the others. Lastly, our metallic gold star. Looking at that ring color and the paint flowing into the nib, I have high hopes for this one, but oh dang, it's really quite dull. What a shame. Let's let those dry and see how that changes the colors. And there we are. I'm actually pretty happy I went out and bought all the colors Faber Castell has available in this range today. Not only is it giving us a really good idea of what every color looks like, but I really think the extra range will help us later on when we art with them. It's an interesting mix of colors and transparencies for each kit. The classic color kit have probably done the best, the quickest here, excluding that white and funnily the blue. Both of them look fairly poor. The other colors are quite dense, although we don't have a really green and that red is not super red. The neons are okay, although they lack a little bit of oomph that I like to see in any neon, and they are a little bit transparent. They may be neon, but they definitely aren't fluoro neon. And the metallics, while they looked promising when they were wet, once they've dried out, they lack a lot of that shine we associate with the metallic color, and frankly, they don't look that crash hot. To give these the best possible chance, I'm going to give them another layer and see what happens to our colors. Let's burn through this really quickly because you don't want to hear me tell you all about each color again. The second coat on the neons is really fleshing out the density or opacity of those colors. While it hasn't really improved the fluoro aspect to them, it's made them much nicer. The classic range. Look, that white is struggling. I think it's quite a thin paint here, so a second layer has helped, but it's still not super great. The yellow and the red, it hasn't really added much as they were so dense before, but that green, surprisingly, and that blue have really benefited from that second layer. Our black still looks black. The metallic range. With metallics, often multiple thin layers really sell the illusion of metal. The colors here have added a little bit to the density of the swatches with this second layer, but not hugely. It obviously hasn't hurt them, but hasn't done a great deal to help them. Just because I'm going to add a third layer to our white. A little bit better, but still not a great white. This does feel it needs to be thicker. Well, there you go. The colors haven't changed a great deal from what we saw on the first layer. That red hasn't become redder, the neons still lack a lot of vibrancy, and the metallic isn't super metallic. But I do think that second layer has helped enough that it's probably something you should make the time to do when using these pens. Realistically, because this is acrylic paint in the pen, I guess it has to be thin to flow through the nibs. any thicker and it'd likely block it up. So the thinness and the lack of the density with this paint is probably something I should have expected. Before we move on, I really want to give our metallics just a little bit more love here. Looking at them flat down really will never do any metallic paint justice. What sells metallic as metallic is light reflections and shine. So what I'm going to do here is pull out my wand. Some of you may remember this from our gold episode, and turn down our lights. And we're just going to run this over the top and see what happens. Well, now that's better. We can see a little bit more of how these paints reflect back this light here. That silver is pretty good, to be honest with you, closely followed by the metallic blue buzz, and possibly our gold. The green and bronze have a little bit of a shine, but not a huge amount. Okay, just to compare a real metallic paint, let's also pull in our test board for the goldest gold, so we can compare. Well, there you go. The silver still holds up a little bit, but in comparison to real gold acrylic paint, none of the Black Edition paint pens come even close. All 5 of our golds are much more metallic. Metallics tend to get their shine from a lot of light layers, so if we took our time and let our metallic paint pens paint cool, then dry, and did it again a couple of times, I think these would be slightly better. But I suspect they would always struggle against any brushed acrylic metallics. It's time to give our Black Edition paint pens a mark for colour. Using our scale of A to F, with S being superb, for a colour range that lacks a bit in a lot of areas and really doesn't pop where I'd like it to, I'm going to give the Faber Castell Black a C for colour. I don't think there's a problem with requiring multiple layers, but the range suffers across several colours. The colour accuracy test is pretty much just that. We as artists need to know what the colour of any art supply is, and the way we do that is by looking at the swatch on that particular art supply and making our decisions based on that, especially with something we haven't used before. How accurate are the Faber Castell Black Edition acrylic marker caps to the colour they put down? Let's have a look, shall we? Starting with our neon slime green, the swatch is not super solid and it's a little hard to tell, but I think the cap is more washed out than the swatch. The neon yellow spark is fairly similar. I think the pigment is a little bit brighter than the cap. There's a lot of colour bounce on the neon flaming tangerine cap, but that cap is much lighter than the colour of the swatch. The neon pop pink is pretty good, probably the most accurate of the neons. Obviously the white moon needs more layers here, but from what I can tell, the cap is pretty close. The sunshine yellow is an excellent colour match. The code red's not bad, although perhaps the swatch has a little bit more pink in it than the cap. Our jungle green's not at all accurate. The actual colour of the pigment is like a turquoise green, not a forest green like the cap. Sapphire blue's much darker in the swatch, but the colour is pretty close. And our midnight black, being black, it's pretty great. Spot on. Onto our metallics with our metallic silky silver. It's pretty close overall. I think because the silver swatch here looks so matte, the lid looks very close. I'm disappointed by the metallic green fizz. I really like the bright colour on the cap, but the paint swatch is really quite different. The metallic blue buzz is a bit similar to our green. Not quite as bad, but still quite a different colour from the swatch. The metallic rockstar rose is pretty consistent with our last 2 colours. The swatch is much darker than the cap. It's also more violet than the cap. The metallic bronze glow is not a bad match. The swatch looks to be more orange than the cap, but it's not bad. Our last cap is the metallic gold star. It's not bad overall, probably one of the better matches here, although there may be a bit more green in the swatch than the cap. It's always interesting to see how well a company does in the colour accuracy test. Obviously, some colours are easier to match from the cap to the swatch than others. Of course, on more budget targeted products, there likely isn't really as much pressure or effort put in to be super accurate. But it is a shame because even with cheaper products, we really do need something quite close to what the colour is going to produce to do the best work we can with them. The Faber Castell Black Edition paint pen's colour accuracy here is pretty average. Other than that terrible green in the primary colours, the rest are okay, but the neon and the metallic runs are all just enough off to make it annoying to use. I guess there really isn't a super large range of colours in this entire range, so you'd likely learn to compensate for this, but for our purposes today, I'm going to give the Black Edition a pretty average score of B-. And that puts them here. Our next test, we're going to try and blend these markers. Blending paint pens is not really something people think about when they think paint pens. But in the end, even though they're pens, they're really just acrylic paint. So of course we should be able to blend them. But how good they are and how good they blend and what sort of color we get in doing so is what we're going to find out. Let's have a look. What I'm doing for this test is mixing two colors together to see whether we can make a whole new color. Our first blend will be between our Sunshine Yellow and our Code Red. Our second one, our Sunshine Yellow again, and our Sapphire Blue. Let's start with our first blend. I'm going to take our lighter color, the Sunshine Yellow, across first and bring it about 3/4 of the way through. I'm also going to make sure the area where I'm going to meet the red is particularly juicy or wet here. So we have lots of yellow paint for the red to mix with. I'm just going to go straight in with our red right on top of that yellow. As soon as we hit that yellow, because it's really wet already, we can see it's mixing and producing quite a nice orange color in the center. Let me just finish off our red, and that's not bad, is it? I'm just going to dip back in with my yellow pen on the edge of that red here. That will just soften the gradient a bit between the yellow and orange. I'm just cleaning up my yellow on this scrap piece of paper, and you can really see how orange that color is. That's a pretty nice blend overall. We have distinctive yellow going into an orange in the center and then red on the right hand side before it goes back to yellow. Okay, scooting across to my yellow and blue. Obviously, what I'm hoping for with this blend is a nice green color because, well, yellow and blue make green, hopefully. Starting the same with our Sunshine Yellow and making sure we've got lots of wet paint for our blue to go into on the right hand side. There we go, and we can see the blue mixing with the yellow to create quite a dark green. I guess because that blue's so dark. But if we bring in a little bit more yellow to the middle, there, we should be able to lighten it a little. There we go. From left to right, we've got yellow, quite a nice green in the middle, and then our blue on the right. So that was our color blend test for our paint pens. And to be fair, this was actually much easier to do than I expected, particularly when the markers left a lot of paint to be blended into. Obviously, acrylic paint blends easily, but because this paint is so thin, I wasn't sure what would happen here. I was also a bit worried that using these markers as blending implements might make the tips fray or degrade a bit, but nope. They actually seem pretty fine. Looking at my results here, I do think blending with these pens would work a lot better if it wasn't on paper. I'm really limited by how many times I can go over them before the paper was destroyed. Canvas or board or anything else that's a bit stronger, you could just keep mixing until you get the color that you wanted, which would make these markers much more versatile as you'd have so many more color combinations and opportunities with them. Okay, time to mark our black additions for blending. Not bad, pretty good overall. I'd expect a better blend with pure acrylic paint, but taking into account that these are pens, I'm going to give them a really solid B. They blend quite well. I'd be most curious to see how other paint pens blend in comparison. Let's build upon our last blending test and try something a little bit similar, but also a little different, and see how well these pens can gradient. Paint pens should gradient very similar to our alcohol markers. Basically, we're blending from color to color. With alcohol markers, it's much easier to get a smooth gradient with colors that are similar to each other. We step from a darker or lighter color through several other similar colors to our final color. Even though we don't have a huge range here, I'm going to try and do my very best with what we have with these markers. To make it a little bit more interesting, I'm also going to try and see how we gradient with colors that are quite dissimilar. For our first similar gradient, I'm going to attempt to gradient Jungle Green, Sapphire Blue, Metallic Blue Buzz, and White Moon. And for our second gradient, I'm going to see what happens with Midnight Black, Metallic Bronze Glow, Metallic Gold Star, and Metallic Silky Silver. Starting on the left with our Jungle Green, I'm trying to do what we did with our alcohol markers here and leave a fair amount of feathering at the bottom for the next color to blend into. I'm also trying to make it really juicy with paint here too. That should give us something to mix into. Next, I'm bringing the Sapphire Blue straight into the green. At the same time, I'm sort of flicking it into that wet green paint to help blend it. I've also got my green at the ready here to go back over the blue if I need to. I'm then coming down a bit further with this blue and then setting it up like the green with a heap of paint at the tail end. Okay, on with the Metallic Blue Buzz. Okay, that looks very cool. I'm doing the same thing here as before and trying to blend everything together as smoothly as I can. And setting up that bottom paint ready for the next color. Time for our last color, the White Moon. We're never really going to be able to end in pure white, but I do love that light blue we're creating. In between each layer here, I'm taking my singular markers back onto my scrap paper. This is because I'm basically cleaning the nibs so I don't still get the blended color next time I use them. I'm just going to clean my white off and add a bit more pure white to the bottom there to make it as light as I can. That's one done. Now, let's try our dissimilar colors, starting with the midnight black. Making a nice closed end and then adding a bit of juice to the bottom. Not too much here because the black's so dominant. If we put too much down, it'll take away from the other colors blending into it. Adding the metallic bronze glow. There's quite a difference between these colors, so it's not looking as blended as our blues, but with the black here, it's really acting like a brown and it's a surprisingly rich color. Adding the metallic gold star, it's not too dissimilar to our bronze glow, so it's almost looking like an extension of the bronze here. They work well together, but it's still fairly harsh between them. Let's try and move the metallic silver in. It really hasn't blended or gradiented well. I guess these are just two dissimilar colors as it's left us with a very harsh gradient. Well, that was our gradient test and it hasn't done quite as well as our blending. Looking at these, they are not super smooth in their transitions or their blending along the gradient. I think there's a couple of reasons for this. One is realistically, the paint is not super good at mixing. But like our blending test, if I was on a stronger surface, I could have likely got a much better, wetter paint down and probably had a much easier time of blending this. And lastly, of course, is the color range available. The closer the color is to the color you're gradienting or blending through, the easier it is to get a seamless gradient. The Faber Castell black paint pens just don't have a great color range. There's not a huge amount here, so gradienting is going to be tough with these no matter what I do. For the gradienting test, I'm giving the Black Edition paint pens a C. Unfortunately, there's quite a lot of things against you to do a good gradient with these paint pens. For this test, I've got a whole pile of random surfaces here and we're going to look at how well these paint pens work on them. A lot of people buy and use paint pens to use in their crafting on so many different surfaces. I just want to see how they work. The Black Edition claim they can be used on paper, metal, plastic, glass, fabric, stone and wood, but do they actually do that? So let's paint on some random surfaces and see. I've actually got a really random assortment of surfaces here to paint on today. And they are, first up, stone. I don't know where I got this, but it's a stone disc, I swear. Next is wood, it's basically MDF. Then tile, this is a matte textured tile. Another tile, this white is a glossy white bathroom tile. Plastic, this is like a waxy, greasy type of plastic. I think it originally was a guard for the alcohol markers. Glass, just a piece of glass I found somewhere. Paper, this is the same 300 GSM paper we've been using throughout all of this. And finally, canvas, just a tiny cute canvas I found at the dollar store. Stone. First up, I'm working with my small stone disc. I think this was a craft stone disc that came with a kit, so not exactly sure what type of stone it is. I'm going to try and do the background first and then outline it just to keep our art really simple. I'm definitely finding our background here with this fluoro neon pink is a bit of a challenge opacity wise, which is such a shame as the stone surface is very smooth and easy to use the marker on, but you can just see through all of that paint so easily. You can also see it almost pooling on the edges of the marker. It's just not a nice smooth opaque laydown with the neon. I'm trying to do a few layers on my little worm guy here to build up that color, but it's not helping very much. I'm going to try outlining with purple to see if he pops. Not quite as much as I would like, to be honest, so let's try the black. That made a difference, but he's still not as vibrant as I'd have liked. Wood. The wood, which is just thin MDF wood, starts off much nicer. It's a pretty smooth wood surface. The paint is unfortunately sinking into the MDF quite a bit though, as it's not sealed wood. I feel like if I was to do this test again, I would probably have better results if I sealed the board with something before I put anything over the top of it. Although I did use the smooth side of the board, so I kind of thought it would be okay. Like our stone, I'm still finding it not terribly opaque here either. I am having to do quite a few layers to make it a solid block of color. It is relatively smooth painting, particularly in this middle section here, as that's where we're getting most of the absorption of paint. It is tile rough. Okay, our rougher matte tile. This is actually quite easy to paint on. I'm finding because it's not absorbent and there's a bit of texture to the surface, the paint is sitting quite nicely. I am having to push the paint along a little bit because the tile is a bit rougher than anything else so far. But it feels like the paint is really bonding to the tile in a way that hasn't really done with any other surface. I am starting to have a little bit of an issue here with the paint control though. Sometimes it feels like there's heaps of paint flowing and then suddenly not a huge amount. Paper. Onto our 300 GSM acrylic paper. I am noticing a very similar thing happening here as to what I saw during the opacity test on this paper. It's a little bit scratchy. Like the nib gets caught on the fibers of the surface. There's also a little bit of pooling of the paint on this cheek where I've tried to blend it. But I'd say I really do seem to have a lot more control when using these pens on the paper. I think I have enough control to try and add a little bit of highlighting here. Overall, maybe because I'm now more experienced on the paper, this feels much crisper here, if still scratchy. This plastic is sort of that greasy plastic that's hard to stick to anything, so I'm not expecting super great results here. To make it a bit easier, I've tried to mark out my design here with a whiteboard marker. It looks pretty rough, but I think it's worked. Wow, okay, this is quite tricky. I really don't have much control as painting on this is very slippery. It feels like the nib of the pen is sliding all over the place. As I try and wipe off the whiteboard marker, I'm also getting bits of the Black Edition's paint lifting off, which isn't ideal. I guess I'll try and go freehand from now on. Also, I'm finding it much less opaque than on the paper. I'm having to go over it many more times than I'd like. And like on the rough tile I just did, I'm struggling a bit with the paint flow. Sometimes it's like the paint just gushes out and other times it seems to stop. It's really hard to predict. Painting on plastic with these is not my favorite medium. The marker didn't like it at all, but to be fair, he's quite a cute little bee. Onto our tiny canvas, which I'm going to give freehand drawing a go. Not bad. As I'm putting my base colors down here, I'm noticing a very similar result with the opacity. It's still very see-through. I'm also noticing with the canvas that the paint is just running in whichever direction that it wants to go. It doesn't really sit and stay where you put it. It's following the grain of the canvas. It's like the paint is too thin. It's making it quite hard to keep this artwork tidy. I am finding, like the paper, that I can get more and better details on the canvas, but it's not a super pleasant experience. There's also much more canvas grain coming through than I would have expected. Onto our glass, and this is much nicer. It's much smoother and really much more pleasant to use here. Although we still have that same problem with the opacity. The paint put down by these pens is just really very thin. I am going to have to go over it more than once or even twice to get the full color I want down. If I add another outline of that black, it should make this one pop a little bit better. I think the glass is the most comfortable that I've felt like these markers are. The smoothness and hardness of the glass really seems to make them quite happy, and I'd say this is where they've performed the best so far. My final surface is the smooth glossy white bathroom tile. When I'm painting here, this is feeling really interesting. The marker is kind of sliding on this tile rather than gliding like it did in the glass or the rough tile. It just doesn't seem to really want to bond with this smooth tile, and I'm finding it really difficult to kind of make the paint stick to it. I'm running a little experiment on this tile. I'm going to make a rainbow in this snail shell, and I'm going to get all the colors to run together if I can, kind of like a tie-dye pattern. I'm going to try and use that pooling to my advantage. That's kind of working. I'm just adding a heap of paint and then kind of drawing it all together. As it dries, we'll see whether that's going to work or not. Funny thing is that I'm still having a lot of problems with the neon paint. Doesn't seem to be as even in its distribution as the other colors paint, and attaches to itself rather than staying where you put it. The black is pretty annoying. It just keeps wiping itself off where I'm trying to put it down. It just doesn't want to stick. But looking at that shell there, the pooling of the paint has given a really interesting look, which I kind of like. Well, there we go. Multiple surfaces, all of which felt really very different. I think overall I had the most control on the paper. That said, I was able to get a really interesting and really fun result on the glossy tile, even though when I was painting it, it just felt like I was making paint puddles. When it's dried, that shell looks great. It's two different techniques here. The paper, and ignoring the absorption, the wood and canvas, felt much like I was using regular markers, but the harder sealed surfaces like the glass and the glossy tile felt like I was pushing pools of paint around to let them dry where I wanted. Very different techniques for very different surfaces, I guess. The plastic was just really hard. For every surface, I am finding it quite difficult to predict the flow rate of these markers. Sometimes a whole pool of paint will come out, other times there's not much at all. There's not really any indication of what's going to happen either, so depending on what surface you're painting on, you have the constant worry you may destroy it. I also had a lot of problems with those neon colors. While the color of them is really beautiful, the laydown is really disappointing. I struggled to get a smooth laydown on really any surface, and they were just not super opaque. It's such a shame because the colors are so attractive and so bright, but they just feel so different. They look and feel like completely different paint from a completely different brand, which is frustrating. Well, we've seen how they go down, but now let's see if the paint holds. I have my trusty little scraper here, so let's see how well they've bonded to the surfaces. Okay, even before we get started here, I've moved over to a metal scraper because let's face it, my plastic one won't be super exciting. First up, our stone worm. There's a tiny amount of paint coming off this, but it's bonded very well. I think I'm more scratching the stone here. Our rough tile. This tile is very strong. It's basically done nothing at all, except worn down my scraper. That's a tough ladybug. Our wood, even though it doesn't look like it, the paint has bonded really well here. I think I'm more just destroying the wood here and the paint's coming up with it. Our tiny canvas grasshopper. I'm walking a fine line here between ripping a hole in this guy and testing the bonding. It has taken a bit of paint off, but it's actually done better than I thought. If I'm careful not to rip our paper, and no, it's bonded very well to our paper and it's surprisingly tough. Our glass is next, and that scraper is much more impressive. It is bonded to the glass, but not as well as any of the textured surfaces. Our fancy tie-dye snail on our glossy tile is next, and like our glass, it hasn't bonded well at all. As pretty as he was, our little snail guy looks much the worse for wear. Finally, my favorite little plastic bee. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, like our glass, this hasn't bonded very well at all. Well, there we go. This is acrylic paint after all, so it shouldn't come as much of a surprise that it's done fairly well overall. Textured surfaces have done very well, and smooth glossy ones have done okay, but with a bit of pressure, they will scratch, which is to be expected. For a surface test, taking into account the difficulties I had on some surfaces and some paints that struggled to be as opaque as I'd like, I'm giving the Black Edition paint pens a B. Being acrylic, they handled fine, but it'd be nicer to have slightly denser colors. It's time for our final test. Do these paint pens spark joy, or do they cause despair? This test is very much my personal opinion, which I formed across all of these tests. Do the Faber Castell Black Edition paint pens spark joy? Let's combine everything we've done today and try and use them in a real world situation. I have these very white canvas shoes here, which I think would look much better with a bit of color. Let's have a chat while I attempt to put some art on these. These shoes should be a fun little project to paint here, as a lot of people tend to use paint pens on pretty much anything other than paper. I'm going to try and keep this as simple as I can and go with a little flower scene. These pens have been a really interesting experience overall. Design-wise, I'm a little bit disappointed actually. The Black Edition is synonymous with unique looks and poppy vibrancy. These don't have that. They're pretty muted overall. The color range itself is very limited, and the pens are so covered in stuff, they just don't look great. That color range, I'm going to keep coming back to here because it is the biggest limiter you have with these in your art. I'm just really limited here. I'm trying very hard on this first side of my shoe to include all the colors, but I'm constantly hitting barriers in what colors are available. I think when I flip this, I'm going to try mixing to get a little bit more range. The colors we actually do have are okay. The classics are the best, with the metallics struggling and the neons really feeling like a completely different paint. They all struggle quite a bit with opacity, and particularly those neons, the performance leaves a bit to be desired. Test-wise, they did okay, but not amazing, except for maybe the toughness. Surprisingly, the pigment is quite tough. I feel like blending, gradienting, and everything else would be a lot easier if these had a brush tip option. That way, we can actually paint this pigment much easier. Trying to blend and mix with this solid, quite rough tip is really hard, particularly if you want anything subtler. I think I'm going to take the plunge here and try and get a bit funky and blend up some different colors. Even lightening up our colors with my white is going to give me so much more versatility here. Time to flip and do the other side of my shoe. And I'm actually going to do this slightly different. As I'm planning on doing a character, I think marking it out with pencil may help me a lot here. That's made quite a difference in my control over my ladybug. Thankfully, the black fine tip is very sharp, so I'm able to do a really nice outline of him to make him pop. I'm going to mix up some orange for that flower, a bit of red and a lot of yellow, and that actually does work really well. I think I'd be very hesitant to try and blend this paint directly on my shoes because I'm still finding the pen's flow rate from the nib to be very random. If I mix it on my notebook and then bring the paint across, I'm getting much more control. That's actually helping a lot because, like our surface test, the paint wants to flow with the stitching of the canvas. This side is going down very well, particularly when we've added the range of colors I'm getting from my paint mixing. Let's move on to shoe number 2. This is going to be pretty similar design-wise. After all, they are a pair. One thing that does really stand out with these pens and markers is the price point. They're not the cheapest available, but they are pretty decently priced. If you bought all 3 packs in one go, which trust me, you really want to do because of the colors, you'd be looking at about $65 Australian for all 3 kits, which is about $40 US. Or if you really want to, $17 for the neon kit and $24 for either the classic or metallic kit. So for what they are, they're pretty good value. I've sketched out my bee and my flower and I've mixed most of the colors up to make something a little bit more pleasant. The more I use these, the easier I'm binding them. You learn to compensate for the rough tip, and it also becomes a bit of an adventure to see if you can mix the colors you want from what we have here. It's also helping to move anything that could be affected by the inconsistent paint flow either off your art or somewhere it hopefully won't destroy things. I might have spoken too soon. I haven't done the best work on that last little flower, and I've basically had a ton of paint pool out and it's saturated the canvas to a point where I may have to let it fully dry and try again. I'll just add a little bit more and clean up with our white. And done! I think overall they actually turned out very cute. I was considering doing a bit of a rainbow on the white soles here, but I really just love all the negative space, so I'm pretty happy with them. Okay, so do the Black Edition Paint Pen spark joy? Well, there's a lot I struggle with these pens, but overall I have had fun with them, so I'm gonna say yes. Yes, they do. But it's a very fine line with these pens. I'd really love to see Faber Castell release a second edition of these with much better design and really another 8 to 10 or so colors, which would make them a lot more lovable. For the joy factor today, for walking a fine line between meh and ooh, I'm going to give the Black Edition paint pens a C+. And that puts them here. It's time for the big score. I'm going to take all our marks today and average them out to one final big score. The Faber Castell Black Edition Shake and Paint paint pens receive a C+. Well done, Faber Castell. We're definitely going to have to do more paint pens to fill out this graph. Well, that's the end, everyone. Thanks for hanging around with me today. I really hope you've enjoyed checking out the Faber Castell Black Edition paint pens. I'm sorry this episode was so long. I just really got into seeing what these could do. So what do you guys think? Have you been able to find these pens? Do you use them? How do you feel they compare to other paint pens? And of course, as this was our first paint pens, are there any specific tests that you'd like to see? If you want to grab your own set, I've got some links in the description. Every click helps a tiny bit. My next episode may be a little bit late as we're smack bang before the holidays, but when it does appear, we're all just going to be checking out another Faber Castell product. I really should have scheduled different brands after each other, so my bad. The Gold Faber, another pencil that really feels like it's a bit forgotten. Until then, if you want more stuff, have a little look at the links below. We have a very active Discord that you can sign up for. And if you want to come chat and hang out with us, I'm on Twitch. I'm there most days. That's it for now, everyone. Have a brilliant day, a very Merry Christmas, a happy holidays, and all the best wishes for whatever you celebrate. I'll talk to you soon.